My name is Gina, 65 years old and recently retired after teaching elementary school for 4 decades. When my husband Frank passed away last year, my daughter Amanda suggested I sell my house and move in with her family. At first, living with Amanda, her husband Tyler, and my grandchildren seemed like a blessing during my grief. I contributed my monthly pension to household expenses, feeling grateful to have family around me. Then, one evening over dinner, Tyler delivered his ultimatum that changed everything. Before I tell you what happened after they left my bags on the porch, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if family drama stories resonate with you. I spent 40 years teaching 3rd grade at Westbrook Elementary. Every morning I would wake up excited to see my students, to watch their eyes light up when they finally understood something they had been struggling with. Teaching was never just a job for me, it was a calling. Frank understood that. We met at a school fundraiser when I was 25. He was there supporting his nephew and offered to help me carry boxes of donated books to my classroom. That simple act of kindness blossomed into a 35-year marriage built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Frank worked as an electrician, and between my teaching salary and his steady work, we managed to buy a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. We were never wealthy, but we were comfortable. We saved what we could for retirement, took affordable vacations during my summer breaks, and found joy in simple pleasures like our Sunday morning coffee ritual on the back porch. When Frank clutched his chest while mowing the lawn and collapsed, my world shattered. The paramedics tried everything, but the heart attack was massive and sudden. I found myself alone at 64, earlier than anyone plans for. The funeral expenses took a significant chunk of our savings, and suddenly our careful financial planning seemed inadequate. My teacher's pension provided $2,000 monthly, which would have been enough to maintain our mortgage payments, but the house itself became overwhelming. The leaky roof Frank had planned to fix, the aging water heater that needed replacement, the yard work that had always been his domain, all became daily reminders of his absence and my limitations. The decision to sell our home came after 6 months of struggling to maintain it alone. I would find myself sitting at our kitchen table, bills spread out before me, crying over repair estimates and property tax notices. Our neighbor Judy suggested I consider downsizing, and though the thought of leaving the home where Frank and I had built our life together broke my heart, practicality eventually won out. The process of selling was excruciating. Each room held memories that I wasn't ready to part with. The height markers on the kitchen wall from when Amanda was growing up. The dent in the hallway where Frank had accidentally bumped the bookshelf while carrying in our new couch. The garden where we had spent countless weekends nurturing tomatoes and zucchini. Every corner of that house told our story. The real estate agent suggested I remove personal items to make the house more appealing to buyers. I spent weeks packing photos and mementos, each one a piece of my heart carefully wrapped in newspaper and placed in storage. When the house sold after just 2 weeks on the market, I felt both relief and profound loss. It was during this vulnerable time that Amanda called with her invitation. "Mom, why don't you move in with us? We have the guest room, and the kids would love having you around. Family should stick together during hard times." Initially, I resisted. I valued my independence and worried about imposing on their family dynamic. But Amanda persisted, and when Tyler got on the phone to add his encouragement, I began to consider it seriously. "Gina, we would be honored to have you join our household," Tyler said with what seemed like genuine warmth. "The kids miss their grandfather terribly, and having you here would help them heal too." Their home was a spacious 4-bedroom in a good school district, about 30 minutes from my old neighborhood. Amanda worked as a dental hygienist, and Tyler was in sales for a pharmaceutical company. They seemed financially stable, and the guest room they offered was comfortable with its own attached bathroom. The arrangement seemed ideal for a transition period, while I figured out my next steps. Moving day was bittersweet. I had downsized dramatically, selling or donating most of my furniture, and keeping only what would fit in my new room: my bedside table, a comfortable reading chair, a small desk, and carefully chosen personal items. Amanda helped me arrange everything, making thoughtful suggestions about where to place my few remaining pieces. Tyler carried boxes and assembled my bed frame, joking about how he was finally putting his expensive tools to good use. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment but generally positive. I established a routine of helping prepare breakfast for the kids, before school tidying the house while everyone was gone, and having dinner ready when Amanda returned from work. Tyler's schedule was less predictable with frequent evening meetings and business dinners, but when he was home he was polite and engaging. My grandchildren Lily and Jake were a source of pure joy. At 8 and 10 they were at wonderful ages full of curiosity and enthusiasm. I helped them with homework, listened to their school day stories, and began teaching Lily how to bake the chocolate chip cookies that had always been Amanda's favorite. Jake showed interest in the bird-watching hobby. Frank and I had shared, so I bought him a beginner's field guide, and we spent weekend mornings identifying visitors to the backyard feeder. I contributed $1,000 monthly to household expenses without being asked. It seemed fair given that I was occupying space in their home and using utilities. Amanda tried to refuse at first, but I insisted. I need to contribute to feel comfortable here, I explained, and she eventually accepted with gratitude. The first hint that things weren't as harmonious as they appeared came about 2 months into my stay. I overheard Tyler and Amanda arguing in their bedroom. Their voices were muffled, but I clearly heard Tyler say, "Your mother can afford more than she's giving us. That pension is just sitting in her account while we're stretched thin." Amanda's response was too quiet to make out, but the conversation left me feeling uneasy. I hadn't been aware they were experiencing financial difficulties. Their lifestyle certainly didn't suggest it with Tyler's new golf clubs and Amanda's regular salon appointments. The next morning at breakfast, Tyler mentioned casually, "Housing costs in this area are getting ridiculous. Our property taxes just went up again." He glanced at me significantly before adding, "Everyone needs to pull their weight these days." The comment hung in the air awkwardly until Amanda quickly changed the subject, asking Lily about her upcoming school play. But the seed of discomfort had been planted, and I began noticing other subtle shifts in the household atmosphere. Family dinners became tense affairs with Tyler frequently checking his phone or making pointed comments about expenses. Amanda began working additional hours, leaving earlier in the morning and returning later in the evening. The children sensed the change too, becoming quieter at meals and spending more time in their rooms. I tried to compensate by taking on more household responsibilities, deep cleaning on weekends, and preparing more elaborate meals, but my efforts seemed to go unnoticed or worse, were met with criticism. "Mom, we don't need fancy dinners," Amanda said one evening, after I'd spent hours making Frank's special lasagna recipe. "Simple would be fine. Save your energy." The subtext was clear: stop trying so hard. I began to feel like an unwelcome guest rather than family, and the confidence with which I had entered this arrangement began to crumble. Over the next 6 months, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly strained. Tyler's initial politeness gave way to barely concealed impatience. He would sigh loudly when I entered a room, or abruptly end conversations when I joined them. When I asked if everything was all right, he would respond with a tight smile and say, "Everything's fine, Gina. Just busy with work." But his actions told a different story. Amanda began to mirror her husband's behavior, though in more subtle ways. She stopped asking about my day or sharing stories about her patients. Our mother-daughter conversations became practical exchanges about household needs or the children's schedules. When I tried to discuss deeper topics, she would check the time and suddenly remember an errand or task that needed immediate attention. Only Lily and Jake remained consistently affectionate, seeking me out for help with projects or simply to share their thoughts. But even this relationship began to show strain as Tyler started making comments like, "Grandma is probably tired," or "Let's give Grandma some space," effectively separating me from the children I had grown to depend on for emotional connection. The financial dynamic also shifted dramatically. What had begun as my voluntary contribution turned into an expected payment, with Tyler casually mentioning your $1,000 when discussing household budgets. Then, one evening, as I handed Amanda my usual check, Tyler interjected. "Actually, Gina, we were hoping you might be able to increase your contribution to $1,500, he said, not meeting my eyes. "With inflation and everything, costs are just piling up." I was taken aback, but agreed, assuming this was a temporary need. The next month, however, the expectation had risen to $1,800, and Tyler began timing his requests to coincide with my pension deposit dates, which he somehow always seemed to know. My privacy began to erode in other ways, too. I noticed my mail had been opened before I retrieved it from the basket by the door, particularly official-looking envelopes that might contain financial information. When I mentioned this to Amanda, she shrugged it off. Dad probably thought it was household bills. He handles all our finances. One afternoon, I returned from a walk to find Tyler at my desk, my bank statement in his hands. He didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. Just making sure you're not getting scammed, Gina. Lots of people take advantage of seniors these days. I was 70 years old, not incompetent, but the implication stung. More troubling was his follow-up question. I notice you spent $300 at Nordstrom last week. Treating yourself? The purchase had been birthday gifts for Lily and Jake, but I found myself stammering an explanation, as if I'd been caught doing something wrong. Only later did I realize how inappropriate his scrutiny was. But by then a pattern had been established where my financial decisions were considered family business. The invasion extended beyond finances to my social life as well. When my longtime friend Harriet called to arrange a lunch date, Tyler answered the phone and told her I was too busy helping with the grandkids without even consulting me. I only learned about the call when Harriet texted me later, concerned that I was being overworked. Family outings began to happen without me. I would come downstairs on a Saturday morning to find the house empty except for a hastily scribbled note, "Took kids to the park. Back later." The first few times I told myself they were being considerate letting me sleep in. But when Amanda posted photos on social media of family trips to the zoo or local festivals that I hadn't even been told about, the deliberate exclusion became undeniable. Even the common areas of the house began to feel off limits. If I settled in the living room with a book, Tyler would invariably appear minutes later, turn on the television at high volume, and sprawl across the couch. If I baked cookies or prepared a special treat, he would make comments about unnecessary expenses or too much sugar for the kids. My attempts to contribute to the household through cooking or cleaning were increasingly met with criticism rather than appreciation. My physical health began to suffer under the constant stress. My arthritis flared up, making mornings particularly difficult. When I mentioned needing to schedule a doctor's appointment, Tyler rolled his eyes. "Another medical bill. Maybe you should try those exercises on YouTube instead." When Amanda finally drove me to see my rheumatologist, she waited impatiently in the reception area, checking her watch every few minutes and sighing loudly when the appointment ran long. The doctor prescribed a new medication, and when I asked Amanda to stop at the pharmacy on the way home, she said, "Can it wait until next week? I'm already late picking up the kids." The once loving daughter who had insisted I move in to be cared for now seemed to view my basic health needs as impositions. It was a painful transformation to witness. I tried several times to have an honest conversation with Amanda about how I was feeling, always choosing moments when Tyler was away, but these attempts went nowhere. "Mom, you're just not used to living with other people after being on your own," she said dismissively when I brought up feeling excluded. "Tyler is under a lot of pressure at work," was her response when I described his increasingly cold behavior. "You're being too sensitive," she insisted when I showed her my opened mail. The gaslighting made me question my own perceptions. Was I overreacting? Was I the problem? I began keeping a journal documenting incidents and conversations to reassure myself that I wasn't imagining the hostility. One particularly difficult evening, after Tyler had criticized the dinner I'd prepared and Amanda had remained silently complicit, I retreated to my room and called my former teaching colleague Susan. As I described my situation, her concern validated my experience. "Gina, that sounds like elder abuse," she said quietly. "Financial and emotional. You deserve better treatment than that." Her words hit me hard. I had been so focused on not being a burden on making the arrangement work for my daughter's family that I hadn't recognized how unhealthy the situation had become. But even with this realization, I felt trapped. Where would I go? What could I afford on my pension alone? The housing market had only gotten more expensive since I'd sold my home, and my savings were dwindling under the increased contributions to Tyler and Amanda's household. I decided to try one more direct conversation with Amanda, hoping to appeal to the loving daughter I remembered. I waited until Tyler was on an overnight business trip and asked her to sit with me after the children were in bed. "I'm worried about our relationship," I began gently. "Things have changed since I moved in, and I'm feeling increasingly unwelcome." Amanda immediately became defensive. "We've given you a place to live, Mom. What more do you want?" "Respect," I answered simply. "Consideration. To be treated like family rather than a tenant or burden." Her expression hardened. "Tyler says you're not contributing fairly to this household. Do you know how expensive it is to run this place? The mortgage, utilities, food for 5 people?" I reminded her that I'd increased my contribution significantly at their request, now giving nearly all of my monthly pension. "Well, costs keep going up," she replied, suddenly sounding exactly like her husband. "If you're unhappy here, no one's forcing you to stay." The conversation ended with nothing resolved, and I went to bed with a heavy heart, finally accepting that my daughter had chosen her husband's side completely. The next family dinner would bring the situation to its breaking point, though I didn't know it yet. 3 days after my failed conversation with Amanda, Tyler announced he was making his special dinner for the family. This was unusual as he rarely cooked, but Amanda seemed nervously excited about it. I offered to help, but he declined firmly. "Just be ready at 6, Gina." The meal was elaborate by Tyler's standards: store-bought rotisserie chicken, packaged mashed potatoes, and microwaved vegetables, all served on our best dishes with the good silverware. He even put candles on the table, creating an atmosphere that felt oddly formal and tense. The children were quieter than usual, picking up on the strange energy in the room. Halfway through the meal, Tyler cleared his throat and looked at Lily and Jake. "Kids, I need to have an adult conversation with Grandma and your mom. Can you go play in your rooms for a bit?" The children looked confused, but obeyed after Amanda nodded encouragingly. Once they were upstairs, Tyler carefully wiped his mouth with a napkin and turned to face me directly. "Gina, we need to discuss the financial arrangement of your living here," he began in a businesslike tone that made my stomach clench. "As you know, housing costs in this area have been rising dramatically." I nodded cautiously, noticing how Amanda suddenly became very interested in rearranging her food. "Our landlord has informed us that rent will be increasing by $800 next month," Tyler continued. "This puts us in a difficult position financially." This was the first I'd heard about a rent increase, and something about the rehearsed quality of his speech made me suspicious. I had been under the impression they owned their home, not rented it. "I thought you had a mortgage, not a landlord," I said carefully. Tyler's expression flickered briefly before he recovered. "Well, yes, technically the bank is our landlord until the mortgage is paid off. And they've increased our payment due to an adjustment in the escrow account for property taxes." It sounded plausible enough, but his momentary discomfort suggested he was not being entirely truthful. "The point is," he continued, "we need to reassess your contribution to this household. Given the increased costs, and the fact that you're occupying a full bedroom and bathroom, plus your share of common areas and utilities, not to mention food and transportation." He paused, seeming to enjoy drawing out the moment. "We've determined that you should contribute your entire pension check to the household expenses." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was suggesting. My entire pension was just over $2,000. I was already giving them $1,800, leaving me barely enough for personal expenses, like my cell phone bill, medications, not covered by insurance, and the occasional small gift for the grandchildren. "That would leave me with nothing for myself," I finally managed to say. Tyler shrugged, as if this was a minor concern. "Your basic needs are covered here. Food, shelter, utilities. What else do you really need at your age?" The dismissive question hung in the air like a slap. I looked to Amanda for support, but she was staring at her plate, her face flushed. "And if I can't agree to this arrangement?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Tyler's expression hardened. "Then, unfortunately, we would need you to find alternative living arrangements. Within 3 days." The coldness with which he delivered this ultimatum shocked me, even after months of deteriorating treatment. He wasn't even pretending this was a difficult decision, or that he cared about my welfare. It was a business transaction to him, and I was simply a tenant who couldn't pay the new rate. "I understand," I said quietly, not trusting myself to say more without breaking down. I excused myself from the table and retreated to my room, where I finally allowed the tears to come. Later that evening, Amanda knocked softly on my door. When I let her in, I could see she'd been crying too, but her resolve remained aligned with her husband's. "Mom, I know Tyler's approach was harsh, but we really are struggling financially," she said, perching awkwardly on the edge of my bed. "This isn't personal." "How can it not be personal, Amanda? I'm your mother. You're telling me to either give up my entire income or leave your home with 3 days' notice. Would you do this to a stranger, let alone family?" She winced at my words but pressed on. "Tyler handles our finances. If he says we need this to make ends meet, I have to trust him." "And what about trusting your own judgment, your own heart? The daughter I raised would never treat anyone this way, especially her own mother." Amanda stood up abruptly. "That's not fair. We've given you a home for almost a year. We've supported you through your grief. We've included you in our family." The revisionist history was startling. In her mind, or at least in the narrative, she needed to believe they had been generous hosts rather than increasingly hostile guardians of space I was paying handsomely to occupy. "I won't be manipulated, Amanda," I said firmly. "Not by Tyler, and not by you. I'll be out in 3 days as requested." A flash of panic crossed her face, suggesting she hadn't actually expected me to choose leaving over compliance. "Where will you go?" The question revealed she hadn't thought through the human consequences of the ultimatum. "I'll figure something out," I said, with more confidence than I felt. I always have. She left without further argument, and I spent the night alternating between tears and frantic internet searches on my phone. Affordable senior housing had wait lists months or years long. Apartment rentals required income, typically 3 times the monthly rent, which my pension couldn't meet for even the most modest units in our area. Extended stay hotels would deplete my remaining savings within weeks. By morning, I had dark circles under my eyes, but a clearer perspective on my situation. I had given Tyler and Amanda power over me by accepting their increasingly unreasonable demands. The only way to reclaim my dignity was to leave even without a perfect plan in place. When I emerged from my room, Tyler was at the kitchen table with his laptop, Amanda was preparing the children's lunches, and Lily and Jake were eating breakfast with the subdued demeanor of children who sensed conflict but didn't understand its source. "I've made my decision," I announced, my voice steadier than I expected. "I won't be giving you my entire pension. I'll be moving out as you've requested." Tyler barely looked up from his screen. "That's your choice. The 3-day timeline stands." Amanda dropped the knife she was using to spread peanut butter, clearly shocked by her husband's coldness, even after their united front the previous night. "Tyler, maybe we could give Mom a little more time to find somewhere suitable," she suggested hesitantly. "We were clear about the terms," he replied, still not looking up. 3 days is already generous." Jake looked up from his cereal, his young face troubled. "Grandma's leaving. Why?" Before I could formulate a gentle explanation, Tyler interjected. "Grandma needs her own place, buddy. She'll be fine." Lily's lower lip trembled. "But I don't want Grandma to go." I moved to comfort her, but Amanda intercepted, giving her a quick hug. "Sometimes adults have to make hard decisions, sweetie. Now finish your breakfast or you'll miss the bus." The children left for school confused and upset, while I began the overwhelming task of figuring out where I would go and how I would pack my belongings under such a compressed timeline. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of panic and desperate phone calls. I contacted every affordable senior community within 30 miles, only to be told the same thing each time: waitlists ranging from 6 months to 2 years. I called rental agencies and was bluntly informed that my income wasn't sufficient to qualify for even their smallest units. I researched extended stay hotels, but the cheapest options would still exhaust my savings within a month. In desperation, I reached out to friends, former colleagues, even distant acquaintances. Most expressed sympathy, but had legitimate reasons they couldn't offer housing even temporarily. 2 friends offered their couches for a few days, but these were band-aid solutions, not real answers. Meanwhile, I had to pack my belongings under increasingly hostile conditions. Tyler worked from home those days ostensibly to help, but more realistically to monitor what I was taking. He questioned items I packed that had been gifts from Amanda years ago. "Are you sure that's yours? Amanda has one just like it." Even personal mementos became subjects of scrutiny. Amanda took the opposite approach, making herself scarce by picking up extra shifts at work and running endless errands. When she was home, she avoided eye contact and conversation, as if my impending homelessness was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. The grandchildren's reactions were the most painful. Jake became angry, refusing to speak to his parents and spending hours in his room. Lily followed me around when she was home, offering her stuffed animals to remember her by and asking repeatedly where I was going and when she would see me again, questions I couldn't honestly answer. On the final day, I had arranged for a small storage unit for belongings that wouldn't fit in my car and made tentative plans to stay with Susan, my former teaching colleague, for a maximum of 1 week while I continued searching for permanent housing. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option available on such short notice. I spent the morning organizing my final packing while the house was empty. Amanda had taken the children to soccer practice, and Tyler had reluctantly left for a meeting he couldn't reschedule. I used the time to write individual letters to Jake and Lily, explaining that I loved them and would see them again soon, trying to frame the situation in terms they could understand without vilifying their parents. When I left to pick up the storage unit key and purchase additional packing supplies, everything seemed as ready as it could be under the circumstances. I expected to have the afternoon to finish loading my car and say goodbye to my grandchildren. Instead, I returned to find my suitcases, boxes, and garbage bags piled unceremoniously on the front porch. My house key no longer worked in the lock. When I rang the doorbell repeatedly, no one answered, though I could see movement behind the curtains. I called Amanda's cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. I texted her. "The door is locked and my things are outside." I thought we agreed I had, until this evening. Her response came 5 minutes later. "Tyler thought it was better this way, less emotional for everyone. Your things are all there." Except they weren't. As I sorted through the haphazard pile, I realized several items were missing a jewelry box containing pieces that had belonged to my mother photo albums from Amanda's childhood and the quilt Frank's mother had made for our wedding. When I texted about these items, Amanda didn't respond. As I was loading what remained into my car, the neighbors across the street came outside to retrieve their mail. They stared openly at the scene, the older woman whispering to her husband as they watched me struggle with heavy boxes. Their judgment felt like salt in an open wound, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at me or the treatment I was receiving. Just as I finished loading everything that would fit in my modest sedan, Lily's face appeared at her bedroom window. Her small hands pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed what looked like "I love you, Grandma." Jake appeared beside her briefly, before someone pulled them both away, the curtain falling back into place like a final door closing on this chapter of my life. The reality of my situation hit me fully as I sat in my packed car, unsure even where to go first. I had been effectively evicted by my own daughter, my belongings deemed so worthless they could be tossed outside like garbage. My relationship with my grandchildren severed with cruel efficiency. In a moment of desperate anger, I called the local police non-emergency line. The officer who responded was sympathetic, but explained the limited options available. "Since you don't have a formal lease and we're contributing to the household, it's a civil matter, not criminal," he explained gently. "You could file for illegal eviction in civil court, but that process takes time." When I mentioned the missing personal items, he suggested filing a property claim, but warned that proving ownership of family heirlooms was notoriously difficult without documentation. He offered to accompany me to the door to request my remaining belongings, but Tyler refused to answer, and Amanda texted that they weren't home despite the cars in the driveway. The officer's final suggestion was to try the local emergency housing services, as they might have resources for seniors in crisis. With few alternatives, I followed his advice and found myself at 65 years old, sitting in the intake office of a community shelter, answering questions about my income, health needs, and how I had become homeless. The intake coordinator, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, had clearly seen every possible human crisis. She didn't flinch when I explained my situation, simply nodding and making notes. "Unfortunately, our family shelter is full, but we do have space in our senior women's dormitory," she explained. "It's temporary emergency housing, maximum 30 days, while we help connect you with more permanent options." The dormitory turned out to be a converted classroom with 6 twin beds separated by partial partitions. My belongings that didn't fit in a single provided footlocker would need to remain in my car, which fortunately could be parked in their monitored lot. My roommates included 2 women in their 70s who had lost housing due to medical bankruptcies, one recovering from addiction, and one with obvious cognitive decline who kept mistaking me for her sister. The final bed belonged to Dorothy, an 80-year-old former librarian whose story paralleled mine with eerie similarity. Her son and daughter-in-law had gradually increased their financial demands until she couldn't comply, then forced on her out. That first night in the shelter, I lay on the narrow bed listening to unfamiliar breathing patterns and occasional soft crying from one of the partitioned areas. The industrial-grade mattress crackled with its plastic covering each time I moved, and the institutional setting with its fluorescent lighting and antiseptic smell was a shocking contrast to the family home I'd left just hours before. I felt hollow, scraped empty of emotion after the day's events. In the bathroom earlier, I had caught my reflection in the institutional mirror and hardly recognized the pale, shell-shocked woman staring back at me. Was this really where life had brought me? From respected teacher and loving grandmother to homeless shelter resident in the span of 3 days? I had tried calling Susan to update her on my situation, but the call had gone to voicemail. In my exhausted state, I had left a rambling message that probably made little sense. The reality was that I was entirely alone for perhaps the first time in my life, without even the basic dignity of privacy in which to process my grief and shock. The next morning, after a restless night, I walked to a nearby park rather than remain in the crowded shelter day room. Sitting on a bench watching children play mothers chatting nearby with coffee cups and watchful eyes, I felt invisible. No one noticed the elderly woman with unwashed hair and yesterday's clothes carrying her few remaining valuables in her purse because she didn't trust the shelter's security. I pulled out my phone to try Susan again, but my finger hovered over her contact information without pressing. What would I even say? How could I explain the magnitude of what had happened? The words seemed inadequate, and the humiliation of my circumstances locked my throat tight. Instead, I simply sat watching normal life continue around me while my own had disintegrated beyond recognition. I had been at the shelter for 3 days, falling into the numbing routine of communal meals and mandatory life skills, classes that seemed designed for people half my age, and long walks to escape the institutional environment whenever life possible. The social worker assigned to my case had given me a discouraging assessment of housing options, suggesting I consider relocating to a rural area where costs were lower or applying for shared housing programs with 6 to 8 month wait lists. On my 4th morning, I was sitting in the day room filling out yet another application for assistance when a voice behind me gasped, "Mrs. Thompson. Gina Thompson." I turned to find a young woman in professional attire staring at me with shocked recognition. For a moment, I couldn't place her, then suddenly the connection formed. "Maria Vasquez." The woman nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't believe it's you. You were my 3rd-grade teacher at Westbrook. You taught me to love reading with those Charlotte's Web chapters you read to us every day after lunch." The memory surfaced immediately. Maria had been a quiet, bright student with a talent for drawing. I had encouraged her parents to enroll her in weekend art classes at the community center. "What are you doing here?" she asked then, immediately flushed. "I'm sorry, that's not appropriate. I work for the County Social Services Department. We coordinate with the shelter on housing placements." The coincidence seemed almost too perfect to be real, but in that moment I didn't question it. Here was a face from my past, someone who knew me as Mrs. Thompson, the respected teacher, not Gina, the homeless senior in crisis. It's a long story, I said, quietly conscious of others nearby who might overhear. Maria glanced around, then made a quick decision. I have a private consultation room booked for this morning. Would you like to talk there instead of out here? In the small but mercifully private office, the professional boundary between us quickly dissolved. Maria listened with growing horror as I related the events that had brought me to the shelter, occasionally wiping away tears. I can't believe this happened to you, she said when I finished. You changed my life, Mrs. Thompson. Do you know I became a social worker because of you? You were the first person who ever really saw me, who made me believe I mattered. Her words pierced the numbness that had enveloped me since being locked out of Amanda's house. For the first time, I felt a flicker of my former self-identity, a reminder that I had value beyond what my daughter and son-in-law had reduced me to. Let me help you, Maria said with determination. This isn't right, and you deserve so much better. What happened next could only be described as a mobilization. Maria made a series of phone calls from her office, speaking rapidly in both English and Spanish, explaining my situation with a passionate advocacy that made my throat tight with emotion. By the end of the day, she had arranged for me to move temporarily into the guest room of Elizabeth Carter, a retired history teacher from my old school district, who had a small but comfortable home about 20 minutes from the shelter. It's not a permanent solution, Maria cautioned as she helped me gather my belongings. But it's safe, private, and will give us time to work on better options than this place. Elizabeth welcomed me with the matter-of-fact warmth characteristic of career teachers. Any colleague of Westbrook is welcome here, she said, simply showing me to a sunny room that felt like a luxury hotel after the sheltered dormitory. Maria says you need some time to get back on your feet. Take all the time you need. The next day, Maria returned with Janet Wong, a retired attorney who specialized in elder law and had worked with the county's senior services department for decades. Over tea at Elizabeth's kitchen table, Janet listened to my story, taking detailed notes. What happened to you constitutes elder abuse, she said firmly when I had finished. Financial exploitation and wrongful eviction at minimum. The fact that it was family members doesn't excuse it, it makes it worse. She outlined several possible legal actions: a civil suit for the return of my property, and excessive financial contributions, an elder abuse complaint that could trigger an adult protective services investigation, and potential remedies for the Repartees investigation, the illegal eviction. But the most urgent issue is stabilizing your housing and financial situation, Janet concluded. Legal proceedings take time, and you need solutions now. That conversation was the beginning of what Maria called Operation Gina Restoration. Word spread through a network of former Westbrook teachers and staff, and suddenly I found myself with a support system I hadn't known existed. Former colleagues I hadn't seen in years showed up at Elizabeth's door with home-cooked meals, gift cards, and offers of help. Susan, who had been out of town dealing with a family emergency when I called from the shelter, arrived with tearful apologies and a trunk full of clothes and personal items she had saved from our teaching days. I kept thinking I'd downsize someday, she explained, but now I'm glad I never got around to it. The local Retired Teachers Association held an emergency meeting and established a temporary assistance fund to help with immediate expenses. When I protested that I couldn't accept charity, the association president herself in her 70s fixed me with a stern look. This isn't charity, Gina. This is community. This is what we do for our own. You'd do the same for any of us. Her words shifted something fundamental in my perspective. Throughout my career, I had given freely to my students, colleagues, and community. Now, in my time of need, that community was responding in kind. Accepting help wasn't weakness. It was participating in the human exchange of care that made life worthwhile. With a temporary roof over my head and a growing support network, I was able to focus on practical next steps. Janet helped me open a new bank account at a different institution, ensuring Tyler couldn't access my funds. Maria connected me with a senior housing specialist who identified several promising options with shorter waitlists than the mainstream programs. Elizabeth suggested I might find therapeutic value in documenting my experience. Writing helped me process my divorce, she explained, showing me her journal from that period. and it creates a record which might be useful later. I began hesitantly at first, just jotting down memories and emotions as they surfaced. But soon the writing took on momentum of its own, becoming not just a record of what had happened, but an exploration of family dynamics, aging, and societal attitudes toward elderly parents. When I shared some of these reflections at a senior center support group, Maria had connected me with the response was overwhelming. Other seniors shared similar stories of family exploitation, isolation, and financial abuse. The group facilitator, impressed by the discussion, asked if I would consider leading a workshop on recognizing and responding to elder abuse. Your story could help others avoid or escape similar situations, she suggested, and your teaching background makes you a natural presenter. The idea of transforming my painful experience into education that might help others appealed to the teacher in me. I agreed to develop a presentation working with Janet to ensure the legal information was accurate, and with Maria to incorporate available resources. The workshop drew unexpected attention. A reporter from the local newspaper attended and published a feature article on elder financial abuse, using my story as a central example. The director of a regional senior advocacy organization reached out to ask if I would speak at their annual conference. Suddenly, my personal crisis was becoming a platform for broader awareness. In the midst of this growing public role, I received an unexpected opportunity. The owner of a small independent bookstore near Elizabeth's neighborhood was looking for part-time help, specifically someone who could recommend books to customers and potentially lead a senior book club. Susan, who knew the owner through community connections, had suggested me. The position was modest, just 15 hours a week at slightly above minimum wage, but it offered something beyond income, purpose, community, connection, and a chance to use my lifelong love of literature in a new context. When the owner, a warm woman in her 50s named Judith, offered me the job after a brief conversation about favorite authors, I accepted with genuine enthusiasm. I can't pay much, she acknowledged, but the employee discount is generous, and you'll be surrounded by books and book lovers all day. That sounds like heaven, I replied truthfully. For the first time since leaving Amanda's house, I felt the stirrings of hope for a meaningful future rather than just survival. I had a temporary home growing resources part-time work and a community that valued me. The road ahead remained uncertain, but it no longer seemed impassable. 3 months after what I had come to think of as the eviction, I had established a new routine. I worked at Bluebird Books 3 mornings a week, led my elder abuse awareness workshop at various senior centers twice monthly, and continued searching for permanent housing. I had applied for senior subsidized apartments through several programs and was on multiple wait lists, with one complex suggesting a unit might become available within 2 months. Life had a provisional quality but also unexpected joys. The senior book club I started at the bookstore had grown to 15 regular attendees who engaged in lively discussions that often continued at the coffee shop next door. My workshop presentations connected me with social workers, elder law specialists, and advocates who were fighting for better protections for seniors. Elizabeth had become a close friend rather than just a landlord, and we often spent evenings working on jigsaw puzzles while discussing books or current events. The one constant ache was the absence of my grandchildren. I had sent cards for their birthdays and holidays, always returned unopened. I had emailed Amanda several times about arrangements, to see them receiving only brief responses, claiming they were too busy right now or going through a difficult adjustment period. I consulted Janet about grandparent visitation rights, but she cautioned that legal approaches might escalate tensions further. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I was selecting produce at the neighborhood grocery store when I heard a familiar voice say, "Mom." I turned to find Amanda standing frozen in the aisle, a shopping basket hanging from her arm. She looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes and a tint set to her shoulders. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The background noise of the store faded as we regarded each other across the display of apples and oranges. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her grip on the basket. "How are you?" I finally asked, keeping my voice neutral, despite the storm of emotions her presence triggered. "I'm managing," she replied, her eyes darting around as if checking for observers. I didn't expect to see you here. I live nearby now, temporarily with a friend. She nodded jerkily. That's good. That you found somewhere. The awkward exchange might have ended there, both of us retreating to our separate lives if not for what happened next. Amanda's phone chimed with a text notification, and when she glanced at it, her face drained of color. She swayed slightly, steadying herself against the produce display. Amanda, are you all right? I moved toward her, instinctively maternal concern overriding months of hurt. She looked up with such naked fear in her eyes that I stopped short. It's nothing, she said unconvincingly. Just Tyler checking where I am. Something in her reaction sent alarm bells ringing through my mind. Let's get some coffee, I suggested, nodding toward the small cafe at the front of the store. Just for a few minutes. She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. I need to get home soon. Over paper cups of mediocre coffee sitting at a wobbly table near the store entrance, the facade finally cracked. Amanda's carefully constructed justifications for how they had treated me began to crumble as she revealed the truth about their financial situation. Tyler lost his job 8 months ago, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The pharmaceutical company downsized his entire division. He's only been working commission-based sales jobs since then, barely making anything. The timeline aligned perfectly with when the demands for increased contributions from me had begun. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I would have understood financial hardship. It was the manipulation and lies that hurt so deeply. Tears filled her eyes. Tyler wouldn't let me. He said it was humiliating that no one could know he couldn't provide for his family. He kept saying he had promising leads, that things would turn around any day. As she continued talking, a disturbing picture emerged. Tyler had been hiding the severity of their financial problems, not just from outsiders, but from Amanda herself. He had maxed out multiple credit cards, taken a second mortgage on the house, without fully explaining it to her, and most alarmingly begun gambling online in desperate attempts to solve their money troubles. He said it was investing, Amanda explained, wiping tears with a napkin, but I found statements showing thousands of dollars going to online poker sites and sports betting. When I confronted him, She stopped looking away. He what, Amanda? I pressed gently. He didn't hit me, she clarified quickly, but he punched the wall right next to my head. He said I had no right to question how he handled our finances, that if I ever mentioned it again, he'd take the kids and leave. The revelation of Tyler's volatility added a new dimension to my concerns, not just for myself, but for Amanda and the children. The kids ask about you all the time, Amanda admitted, checking the time nervously. Lily cries at night sometimes, saying she misses Grandma. Jake got suspended from school last week for fighting. The counselor says he's processing anger about family disruption. Let me see them, I urged. Whatever issues are between us adults, they shouldn't suffer. Amanda bit her lip. Tyler says you'll turn them against him. Is that Tyler talking, or you? I asked quietly. Our conversation ended abruptly when Amanda received another text that sent her into a panic. I have to go. He's asking why I'm taking so long. She stood gathering her things hastily. Please don't tell anyone you saw me. Before she left, I pressed a business card into her hand, Janet Wong's contact information. If you ever need help for any reason, call this number. She's an attorney who specializes in difficult family situations. Amanda hesitated, then tucked the card into her pocket and hurried away, leaving her coffee mostly untouched. The encounter left me deeply troubled. I called Janet that evening and described the conversation, expressing concern not just about my own situation, but about Amanda and the children's welfare. This changes things, Janet agreed. If there's financial manipulation and intimidation happening, your daughter and grandchildren may be at risk too. We need to proceed carefully. Over the next 2 weeks, unexpected communications began arriving. First came a hand-drawn card from Lily delivered to the bookstore where I worked. I miss you, Grandma, she had written in careful letters. My friend Emma's mom helped me send this. Inside was a school photo of her and Jake, both looking more solemn than children their age should. Then came an email from Amanda sent late at night from an account I didn't recognize. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Things aren't right here. I'm scared about what might happen when Tyler finds out we can't make the mortgage payment this month. Can we talk somewhere private? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near Amanda's dental office during her lunch break. She arrived looking even more exhausted than before, but with a new determination in her eyes. I've started talking to a counselor at the Women's Resource Center, she confided. At first, just about financial stress, but now about everything, including how we treated you. I'm so ashamed, Mom. The apology was a beginning, but I kept my focus on the present situation. What's happening with the mortgage? She explained that Tyler's gambling had escalated with losses that had drained their checking account just before the mortgage payment was due. He doesn't know I know how bad it is. I found paperwork for payday loans he's taken out at ridiculous interest rates. We're going to lose the house if something doesn't change. We talked through her options from financial counseling to legal separation, each with its own challenges and potential consequences. I'm most worried about the kids, Amanda admitted. Tyler's been so unpredictable lately. Sometimes super affectionate with them, other times yelling over minor things. By the end of our conversation, Amanda had agreed to consult with Janet and to contact a financial advisor specialized in debt crisis. I can't continue like this, she said, with newfound resolve. For my sake or the children's. The situation accelerated more quickly than anyone anticipated. 2 days later, I received a panicked call from Amanda at 11 at night. Mom, Tyler found out I met with you. Someone from his sales team saw us at the coffee shop. He's been drinking and threatening to take the kids to his parents in Oregon. I'm locked in the bathroom with them. What should I do? I-conference called Janet, who immediately advised Amanda to call the police for a domestic disturbance. Tell them you're afraid for your safety and the children's safety. Don't mention taking the children out of state as a threat unless they ask specifically. What followed was a chaotic series of events that culminated in Tyler being removed from the home with a temporary restraining order after he broke down the bathroom door. Amanda and the children spent that night at a hotel paid for by the Women's Resource Center, and the next day Janet helped Amanda file for an emergency custody order and extension of the restraining order. With Tyler legally barred from the house, Amanda asked if I would stay with them temporarily. The kids need stability right now, and I could use the support, she explained. I understand if you don't want to, after how we treated you. I agreed, moving my few belongings from Elizabeth's guest room back to Amanda's house, not as a dependent this time, but as a source of support. The guest room that had once been my reluctant accommodation now became a refuge for Lily, who was too afraid to sleep in her own room after the incident. The legal proceedings that followed revealed the full extent of Tyler's financial deception and manipulation. Credit card statements, gambling records, and evidence of financial abuse toward both Amanda and me built a compelling case for divorce with cause and permanent custody arrangements that prioritized the children's stability. Tyler's parents, contrary to supporting his plan to take the children to Oregon, were horrified by their son's behavior when presented with the evidence. His mother called Amanda directly. We had no idea things had gotten so bad. Tyler told us you were keeping the children from seeing us, that you were unstable. We should have questioned that. Their support proved crucial in the family court proceedings with Tyler's father, even testifying that his son needed professional help for gambling addiction and anger management before having unsupervised visits with the Tyler's father. Children. Throughout this difficult period, the community support I had built during my crisis proved invaluable. Elizabeth hosted Lily and Jake for adventure weekends when Amanda needed space to work with her attorneys. Susan organized a meal train so we didn't have to worry about cooking during the most stressful times. Maria connected Amanda with resources for children who had experienced household trauma. Most surprisingly, my elder abuse awareness workshop became a platform for family healing when Amanda asked to join me as a speaker, sharing her perspective as someone who had participated in financial exploitation before recognizing it for what it was. I was so caught up in trying to keep my marriage together that I lost sight of basic human decency, she told one group, her voice shaking but determined. I let fear override the values my mother had taught me my whole life. The road back from that kind of moral failure is hard but necessary. Her courage in publicly acknowledging her role impressed me deeply, and opened the door for genuine reconciliation between us. We began having regular honesty talks after the children were in bed, working through layers of hurt, misunderstanding, and the complicated dynamics that had led to our family breakdown. 6 months after the night Tyler was removed from the house, the divorce was finalized with terms that prioritized the children's stability and Amanda's financial recovery. Tyler was required to complete addiction treatment and anger management programs before progressing from supervised to unsupervised visitation. The house would eventually be sold with proceeds divided according to a court-approved agreement that took into account the financial exploitation that had occurred. When Jake asked why his dad wasn't living with them anymore, Amanda and I sat down with both children for an age-appropriate but honest conversation. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt the people they love," Amanda explained. "Dad made some big mistakes that made our home unsafe. He's working on learning better ways to handle his feelings and problems. While he's doing that important work, he'll visit you with Grandma Wilson there to help make sure everyone stays calm and safe." "Is it because he was mean to Grandma?" Lily asked with the directness of an 8-year-old. Amanda looked at me, then nodded. "That was part of it. The way we treated Grandma was wrong. We should never push family away or take things that belong to them, even when we're scared or having money problems." "I knew it was wrong," Jake said fiercely. "I told Dad it was wrong to make Grandma leave." "You were right," I assured him, pulling him into a hug. "And I'm so proud of you for knowing that. Sometimes even grown-ups need to be reminded of what's right." 1 year after the day my belongings were piled on Amanda's porch, I signed a lease on a small 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living community just 10 minutes from Amanda's house. The building offered independent living for seniors with optional social activities, transportation services, and an emergency call system for peace of mind. My new home was modest but entirely mine. Large windows overlooked a community garden where I had already reserved a small plot for spring planting. The living room comfortably fit my reading chair, a small sofa for visitors, and bookshelves for my growing collection from employee discount purchases at Bluebird Books. The bedroom was just large enough for my bed dresser and the desk where I wrote my workshop materials and increasingly personal reflections that were evolving into a memoir. Most importantly, I had created a space where Lily and Jake could visit regularly. A cabinet in the kitchen held their favorite snacks. The sofa converted to a pull-out bed for their occasional overnight stays. Artwork they had created hung proudly on the refrigerator and walls. The journey to this stability had been complex and often painful. Amanda and I had rebuilt our relationship gradually with the help of joint counseling sessions that allowed us to address the hurt and betrayal without descending into blame. We had learned to communicate more directly, to check assumptions, and to prioritize honesty even when it was uncomfortable. I spent so much time trying to please Tyler that I lost myself. Amanda reflected during one of our coffee conversations that had become a Saturday tradition. I was afraid of being a single mom, of financial struggle, of admitting failure. I let that fear override everything else, including the way Mom raised me to treat people with dignity. Her personal growth over the past year had been remarkable. After the divorce, she had increased her work hours at the dental practice and taken online courses to qualify for a practice management position with better pay. She had joined a support group for women recovering from controlling relationships and eventually began mentoring newer members. Most importantly, she had created a healthier home environment for the children. Jake's behavioral problems at school had improved significantly with consistent therapy and the stability of a household without constant tension. Lily had blossomed once more into the bubbly, creative child she had been before the family crisis, eagerly sharing art projects and stories about her friends. Tyler's journey had been more complicated. The court-mandated therapy had revealed underlying issues beyond the gambling addiction, including undiagnosed depression and anxiety that he had been self-medicating through risk-taking behaviors. After initial resistance, he had committed to his treatment program and was slowly rebuilding relationships with his children through supervised visits that gradually increased in duration and frequency. To everyone's surprise, Tyler had sent me a handwritten letter of apology 6 months into his recovery program. "What I did to you was inexcusable," he wrote. "I was so consumed by shame over my failures that I looked for someone to blame and exploit rather than facing my own problems. I'm working to become someone my children can respect, even if I can never undo the harm I caused. I appreciated the gesture without feeling any pressure to reestablish a relationship with him. My professional life had evolved in unexpected ways. What had begun as a simple part-time job at the bookstore had expanded to include managing their events calendar and coordinating a growing number of book clubs for different age groups. My elder abuse awareness workshops had led to consulting opportunities with local senior centers and eventual appointment to the county's Elder Protection Advisory Council. Most fulfilling was the informal support network that had formed among seniors I had met through my advocacy work. We called ourselves the Wisdom Circle, gathering monthly for potluck dinners and conversations about navigating the challenges of aging in a society that often devalued elderly experience. From housing issues to healthcare navigation to combating isolation, we shared resources and strategies while building meaningful friendships. Dorothy, my former roommate from the shelter, had become a particularly close friend after I helped her reconnect with a niece who welcomed her into her home. "You saved me from giving up," she told me. Not just by finding my niece, but by showing me that starting over at 80 was possible. My relationship with my former teaching colleagues had deepened as well. Susan and I traveled to educational conferences together, presenting workshops on second careers after retirement. Elizabeth and I co-hosted community events that brought together seniors and local school children for intergenerational projects. These connections provided not just practical support but a sense of belonging and purpose I had feared losing forever during my darkest days. Perhaps the most unexpected development in my new life was my friendship with Howard, a retired English professor who led the classic literature discussion at the bookstore. Our shared love of Steinbeck and Austen had led to coffee discussions that extended long after the official book club ended. At 70, with silver hair and kind eyes, Howard had his own story of midlife divorce and reinvention. Our relationship was evolving slowly, from intellectual companionship to something potentially deeper, with neither of us feeling rushed to define its parameters. One particularly meaningful evening, Amanda invited me to dinner with the children, and as we sat around their table, a mirror image of that terrible night when Tyler had delivered his ultimatum, I was struck by how completely our family had transformed. "Grandma, will you help with my family history project?" Jake asked, passing me a school assignment sheet. "We need to interview an elder about important life lessons." "I'd be honored," I told him. "I've certainly learned a few lessons worth sharing." Later, after the children were in bed, Amanda and I sat with tea in the living room. "What would you tell Jake about life lessons?" she asked. After everything that happened, I considered the question carefully. I'd tell him that family isn't just about blood connection, it's about how we treat each other. That standing up for your own dignity isn't selfish, it's necessary. That crises can become turning points if we're brave enough to face them honestly. "And about forgiveness?" Amanda asked softly. "That true forgiveness comes after accountability, not instead of it," I replied. "And that rebuilding trust happens one small promise, kept at a time." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm still keeping promises." "We both are," I assured her, "and that's how healing happens." As I reflect on the journey from that devastating ultimatum to the full life I now enjoy, I'm struck by how often strength emerges from our most vulnerable moments. When Tyler demanded my pension or my departure, he thought he was exploiting my weakness. Instead, he inadvertently set me on a path to greater independence, purpose, and authentic relationships than I might ever have discovered otherwise. The painful lessons of that time have become the foundation for a more deliberate and meaningful life. I've learned to value my own worth independent of what I can provide for others. I've discovered the difference between helping and enabling. I've experienced the transformative power of community when we're brave enough to be honest about our struggles. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to begin again, to stand firm in your own truth, and to create boundaries that protect your dignity and peace. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? What helped you find the courage to choose self-respect over false harmony? I'd love to read your stories in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might need to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your worth. Thank you for spending this time with me today. And remember, sometimes saying no is the first step toward a more beautiful yes.